Some problems, technical problems. Sorry. I don't know what happened. Probably my computer went nuts. I don't know. Sorry. I hope it doesn't happen again. So, where were we? We were talking about Pompey from Rome. He retreated to Brundisium, and then here he loaded his army on the ships and ferried it to Durazzo. Okay. Yes. And then let me see if what's happening now. Watch live video. Okay. Yes. So it was a curious tactics for a general who had twice as men as his opponent, but actually Pompey was counting on the aid from the eastern provinces, taking advantage of the influence he had gained in those lands at the time of the wars against Mithridates. "20 years before. Okay. Actually, the conservatives, laden with money, pretensions, insolence, each with servants, wives, friends, luxury tents, uniforms, plumes, they abandoned Rome in the wake of Pompey, after declaring that the senators who remained there would be considered enemy of the Republic. So Caesar entered Rome on March 16th, leaving the army outside the city. He had rebelled against the Republic, but he respected its regulations. He asked for the title of dictator, but the Senate refused. He also demanded that peace envoys be sent to Pompey, and the Senate refused. He asked to have access to the treasury, and the tribune Lucius Metellus opposed it. After this refusal, in the end, he declared, "It is as difficult for me to make threats as it is easy to carry them out." And immediately the treasure was made available to him. Okay, here we are. So, you see, from Rome to Brindisi. Okay? So the conservatives prepared to counter Caesar by amassing three armies. Pompeius in Albania, here. Cato in Africa, and another one in Spain. So Caesar himself went to Spain to secure supplies of wheat. He believed that the Pompeians were not so strong, but faced unforeseen events and difficulties. But as you know, Caesar gave his best in terms of danger. Besieged, one day he diverted a river and he became the besieger. So the enemy capitulated and Spain was again under the control of Rome. The people in Rome, saved from famine, welcomed him, and the Senate even gave him the title of dictator. But now Caesar refused it. The consulship was enough, and voters at the People's Assembly promptly gave it to him. He then gathered the army in Brindisi on the footsteps of Pompey. He boarded 20,000 men on the 12 ships he had at his disposal and landed them in Albania on the trail of Pompey. And Pompey was really stunned. He was convinced that in winter no one would dare cross the arm of the sea, which was patrolled by his mighty fleet. Why didn't he attack that reckless enemy who dared to defy him with so little force? We will never know. Still, Pompey was also favored by the weather. Caesar's ships, in fact, shipwrecked, and thus he could not ferry the rest of the army. The weather finally got good again, and Mark Antony, this guy here, the best of his lieutenants, with other men and supplies, could reach Caesar's demoralized troops. The majority of Pompey's followers now convinced the general to look for the fight, because they were convinced that Caesar was weak and would lose. So Pompey ran after the enemy and reached him in the plain of Pharsalus in Thessaly, northern Greece. You see it here, Pharsalus, here in Greece. And Pompey had 50,000 infantrymen and 7,000 cavalrymen, and Caesar 22,000 infantrymen and 1,000 cavalrymen. That's the numbers which are undisputed for favoring Pompey. So how could he lose? In fact, on the eve of the battle, in Pompey's camp, there were great banquets, speeches, drinks, toasts to celebrate the victory, while Caesar, on his side, ate grain and cabbage with his soldiers in the mud of the trail. The next day, August 9th, 48 BC, Caesar made his masterpiece. Caesar's veterans, who were perfectly trained, defeated the Pompeian troops, which were uneven and less motivated, as they were largely composed of newly enlisted soldiers and auxiliaries provided by provincial communities and client kings. Caesar's army lost only 200 men, but killed 15,000 and captured 20,000. Caesar ordered them to be spared and celebrated the victory under Pompey's sumptuous tent, eating the lunch that the cooks had prepared for Pompey to celebrate his triumph. After Pharsalus, many supporters of the Republic preferred to surrender. In fact, Caesar had repeatedly guaranteed that defeated enemies who surrendered, who could pass on his side or return unharmed to their private life. At that moment, Pompey was riding towards the port of Larissa, always followed by a flock of aristocrats. Among them, there was also Brutus. Brutus was the son of his oldest mistress, Servilia, and perhaps Pompey was even his father. From Larissa, Brutus sent Caesar a letter asking him for forgiveness for himself and for his brother-in-law Cassius, and Caesar immediately acquitted both of them, a gesture that will cost him dearly. Pompey had been joined by his wife, and he embarked for Africa, intending to put himself at the head of the last senatorial army, the one Cato and Labienus had been organizing in Utica. The ship anchored in the waters of Egypt. Egypt was a vassal state of Rome, which administered it through its young king, Ptolemy XIII. Ptolemy was a young boy at the mercy of his prime minister, his name being Pothinus. Pothinus already knew about Pharsalus and believed that he was securing the winner's gratitude by assassinating the loser. As Pompey disembarked from a lifeboat, he was stabbed in the back under his wife's eyes. And his head was presented to Caesar, who, when he arrived and saw it, turned away his own with horror. You see the head of Pompey's head, which has been severed from his body on this before docking at the port of Alexandria. Now Caesar, before returning to Rome, now that he was there, he wanted to fix things which had been going bad for a long time. According to their father's will, Ptolemy was to share the throne with his sister Cleopatra after marrying her. This is quite common in ancient Egypt, where pharaohs almost always married their sisters. But when Caesar arrived, Cleopatra was not there. Pothinus has confined her and locked her up. Caesar sent for her secretly, and to reach him, she had herself hidden in a carpet that the servant Apollodorus brought to the apartments of the illustrious guests at the royal palace. When the carpet was opened, Caesar found himself in front of a woman. And what a woman! Now, the Cleopatra, we are at the end, we are facing her. And so I put these three images, okay? You know probably two of them. You surely know one on the left side. This is Elizabeth Taylor starring as Cleopatra in her film, in her movie, the movie she wanted. She strongly wanted, and is this Cleopatra? Probably not. I'm sure not. The second in the center is Gal Gadot. She's starring in a new film, same title, Cleopatra, and maybe she's closer to the real Cleopatra than Elizabeth Taylor. And the one on the right is another film by Cleopatra. I discovered that there are so many films about Cleopatra and Mark Antony, Cleopatra and Caesar. So this is one of them, where you can see that the traits of Cleopatra are not even European, Caucasian, but more African or Asian. So it's closer. But what was the real appearance, look of Cleopatra? Well, this is the statue of Cleopatra as displayed in the Archaeological Museum in Berlin. And this is on the right, the rendering of Cleopatra based on this statue. So you see that we are quite far from the representations of the earlier page. But we all know from historians that Cleopatra was not beautiful, but she was very sexy. She was an expert in cosmetics and powders with a melodious voice. And besides, she was also a very curious and cultured person. She knew the basics of astronomy, geometry, arithmetic, and medicine. She was very skilled in rhetoric, and above all, according to Plutarch, she knew at least 8 languages, among them Greek. And Caesar, who was an inveterate womanizer and was also 52, certainly he did not back down. So the next day he reconciled the brother and sister, that is, he practically gave all power to her. Pothinus was suppressed discreetly on the pretext that he was conspiring. But at this point, the city rose against Caesar, and the local garrison joined the rebels. With his few men, Caesar turned the royal palace into a fortress. He sent a messenger to his troops in Asia Minor to ask for reinforcements. He burned the fleet so that it did not fall into the hands of the enemy, and unfortunately the fire spread also to the great library, honor and pride of Alexandria. And he himself, by swimming, he led an assault on the islet of Pharaoh, and here he waited for the reinforcements to arrive. Cleopatra bravely stayed with Caesar, and when reinforcements arrived, they easily defeated the Egyptians. Well, Caesar had prevailed at the end, and he promptly put Cleopatra back on the throne. He stayed with her for 9 months, the exact time it took her to give birth to a child who was called Caesarion, so that there was no doubt about who was the father. It had to be love, at least on Caesar's part, to make him deaf to the appeals from Rome. In his absence, in fact, the city had fallen prey to the violent squads led by Milone. The young queen had earned Caesar's support by exploiting her feminine charm and the weapons of seduction. But at the news that he was about to embark on a long cruise with her on the Nile, Caesar's soldiers rebelled. So Caesar shook himself, put himself at the head of his troops, and first set out for Asia Minor. Here, in Asia Minor, Pharnaces, king of the Bosphorus, which is present-day Crimea, and son of Mithridates VI, was trying to take advantage of the Roman civil war to expand his kingdom. It was a very short campaign. Pharnaces was defeated in a few weeks from Caesar's arrival at Zela, and when Caesar celebrated the triumph in Rome, he displayed a sign with only 3 words: Veni, Viti, Vici. I came, I saw, I won. Then he embarked for Taranto, taking Cleopatra and their child with him, and as if nothing had happened, he showed up in Rome and to his wife Calpurnia with this living prey of war. Calpurnia did not blink. She was used to her husband's infidelities. The situation in Rome was not good at the time. Grain no longer came from Spain. Here, Pompey's son had organized an army, and not even from Africa. Here, Cato was dominant. His forces were equal to those of Pompey in Pharsalus. So in Italy, it was chaos. Caesar had instructed his lieutenant Mark Antony to maintain order, but Antony was a soldier and solved the problems the only way soldiers do, by unleashing his troops. 1,000 Romans had been slaughtered in the Forum, and Milone had fled to organize the revolt outside Rome. Here, several legions had rebelled. To solve the problem, Caesar began from the army. He presented himself alone and unarmed to the legions that had revolted, and said with his usual calm that he recognized their legitimate claims and would satisfy them on his return from Africa. To Africa, he would go with other soldiers. At those words, veterans rose, shouted that they were Caesar's soldiers, and they intended to stay so. Caesar pretended some difficulties, then surrendered for the simple reason that he had no other soldiers. He loaded the troops on the ships, landed in Africa in April 46, and found 80,000 men waiting for him under the command of Cato, his former lieutenant Labienus, and Juba, the king of Numidia. Once again, he lost the first battle, but once again he won the decisive battle, which was terrible. Cato, his main opponent, ran back to Utica with a small detachment. He advised his son to submit to Caesar, offered lunch to his closest friends, and entertained them about Socrates and Plato. Then he retreated to his room and plunged a dagger into his belly. When Caesar knew, he sadly said that he could not forgive Cato for taking away the opportunity to forgive him. Then he gave him solemn funerals and offered his clemency to his son. After a brief stop in Rome, Caesar embarked for Spain to get rid of the last Pompeian army and defeated it in Munda. So, at the end, no one could now oppose Caesar's absolute power. And in fact, in 47 BC, the Senate had granted him the title of dictator for 10 years, and then for life. Caesar was back in Rome in October, and after all, he stayed in Rome for no more than 5 months before being assassinated. He took the title of Imperator, and he could then pass it on to his descendants. And every day he could wear the laurel wreath. The victorious generals wore it only on the day of the triumph. His statue was erected among those of the ancient kings of Rome. In his honor, the 5th month after March, which was the first month of the archaic Roman calendar, was given the name Julius, hence Luglio in Italian and July in English. After so much war, there was no one left to fight. It looked like peace could last for years, and Caesar devoted himself entirely to the work of reorganizing the state. Formally, the Republic, with its magistrates and assemblies, was still operational, but civil, military, and religious powers were practically in the hands of a single individual who acted as a magistrate, but in reality had no constraints on his decisions. The assembly was on his side, and Caesar reduced the Senate to a purely advisory body. Members grew from 600 to 900, with new elements chosen partly from the Roman bourgeoisie, partly among the provincial bourgeoisie, partly among his old Celt officers, many of whom were children of slaves. He granted Roman citizenship to Gallia Cisalpina, which he had known and ruled as a governor. Now, Italy was Roman, from the Alps to the Strait of Messina, both culturally and legally. And he began to reform the bureaucracy and the army with these provincials of peasant or bourgeois origin. To reward his veterans, but also to solve the problem of urban poor citizens, he distributed lands to 80,000 heads of families, and to avoid expropriating lands, he founded a series of colonies in the provinces in Gaul, Greece, and Carthage. Also, to have agricultural land to distribute and obtain at the same time opportunities for work for the urban populace, he planned the reclamation of the Pontine marshes south of Rome. He ordered important public works in Rome. The Forum was renovated, the Basilica Julia and a new Curia for the meetings of the Senate were built. He also decided to build a new forum next to the Roman Forum, which was now insufficient for the needs of Rome. The Forum of Caesar was the first of the imperial forums to be built, starting from 54 BC, as an extension of the ancient Roman Forum. Here we can see a map of the area of the imperial fora, and here, if you walk along the imperial fora, here you will find the Colosseum and here the Arch of Constantine. Here is the altar of the motherland, the Trajan's column, and this is the forum of Caesar Forum. Okay, so some areas of the fora are buried under the Via dei Fori Imperiali, the way of the imperial fora, designed by Mussolini to celebrate the empire at the time, and to celebrate fascism actually. And so you can see that part of this of Caesar's Forum is also buried under the street. Okay. And so the forum was built on an area previously occupied by private buildings, purchased between 1660 and 100 million sesterzi. Thinking that in the days of the empire you could buy 1 kilo of bread with half a sestertius, and that today a kilo is bought for 3 euros, a very coarse estimate shows that the cost could be about half a billion euros, about 600 million American dollars. So Caesar built it following a vow he had made before the Battle of Pharsalus against Pompey, and it was dedicated in 46 BC. And the work, which remained incomplete due to Caesar's death, was finished by Octavian after Caesar's death, and a new inauguration took place on May 12, 113 AD, under Emperor Trajan, who restored it. And a further reconstruction took place with the Emperor Diocletian following the fire of 283 AD. And the area occupied by the forum measured 160 meters times 75 meters, and it was surrounded on 3 sides by a double colonnade. In the center of the square stood the statue of Caesar on a horse whose forelegs had the shape of human feet. The southwestern side consisted of a series of shops of varying depths, built with blocks of tuff and travertine. And on one side of the square, the temple of Venus Genetrix occupied the bottom of the square, and it was its real architecture and ideological fulcrum. In this photo here, you can see the detail of the 3 Corinthian columns and the trait of the trebation found during the excavation. A statue of Venus Genetrix, a work of the Greek sculptor Agesilaus. She was the mother of Enea and the mythical progenitor of the gens Julia, because Julius Caesar, Julius stands for the gens, for his original tribe. Julia, the gens Julia. It was originally located inside the cell. So, in these enterprises, Caesar put the same energy that he had put in battle as a general. He wanted to see everything, know everything, decide everything. He did not admit waste and incompetence. The policy of full employment was in line with his ambition to build grandiosely. Caesar, after all, was a builder, and he had shown it as a general too. He also innovated the calendar. To heal the growing disagreement between the calendar year and the actual pace of the seasons, Caesar called from Alexandria a Greek astronomer and introduced a year of 365 days, with a leap year of 366 days every 4 years. It is the Julian calendar, that is still used today with slight modifications. He was totally indifferent to the dangers that threatened him. He could not ignore that many were plotting around him. But he did not consider his enemies brave enough to dare. And he dreamed of new enterprises, avenging Crassus against the Parths, extending the empire over Germany, finally refounding the whole of Italian society based on ancient customs. Did he want to be a king? We don't know. The most significant episode took place on February 15th, 44 BC, during the Lupercalia. Lupercalia was one of the most ancient festivals in Rome. It was held each year on February 15th, and it was a bloody, violent, sexually charged celebration. Animal sacrifices, random matchmakings, and couplings in the hopes of warding off evil spirits and infertility. So Lupercalia took place to honor the she-wolf at the origin of Rome, and pleased the Roman fertility god Lupercus. The rituals traditionally took place on Palatine Hill and within the Roman open air. The festival began with the sacrifice of one or more male goats, symbols of sexuality and fertility, and also a dog, sacrificed by priests called Luperci. Afterwards, the foreheads of two naked Luperci were smeared with the animal's blood, using the bloody sacrificial knife. And after the ritual sacrifice, the feasting began, and when it was over, the Luperci cut strips of goat hide from the newly sacrificed goats, and then ran naked, or half, or nearly naked, around the Palatine, whipping any woman within striking distance, as you can see in this drawing. Many women welcomed the lashes and even bared their skin to receive the fertility rite. And over time, nakedness during Lupercalia lost popularity. The festival became more chaste, and women were whipped on their hands by fully clothed men. In the late 5th century AD, Pope Gelasius eliminated the pagan celebration of Lupercalia and declared February 14th a day to celebrate the martyrdom of Saint Valentine instead. Also, it's highly unlikely that he intended the day to commemorate love and passion. But Valentine's Day is not the only festival that presumably comes from the Roman Lupercalia. Even the carnival draws some aspects from these celebrations, such as chaos and purification. So back to Caesar. During the festival, Caesar watched the ceremony on his golden seat in triumphal attire, while Marcus Antony was one of the participants in the race. When Antony entered the forum and the crowd opened before him, he handed Caesar a tiara intertwined with a laurel wreath. There was applause, not roaring, subdued, as it were prepared. Caesar rejected the crown, and all the people applauded. Then Antony again offered the crown, and again flew applauded, and again everyone applauded when Caesar rejected it. Seeing these things, the supporters of the Republican tradition were increasingly concerned about the possible installation of a monarchical regime and decided that it was time to take action. They were also encouraged by the seemingly hostile reaction of the people. The plot was clothed in noble ideas. They said they wanted the death of a tyrant who aspired to the crown, to share it with Cleopatra, then leave it to the bastard Caesarion after moving the capital to Egypt. Had he not erected a statue of himself next to those of the old kings? Hadn't he had his face engraved on the new coins? Power was very tempting. It was better to kill him before he destroyed Rome's freedom and supremacy. And at the beginning of March, the two leaders of the conspiracy, Brutus and Cassius, were informed that at the next Ides, that is, the 15th, Caesar would make the great announcement. His lieutenant Lucius Cotta would propose the assembly to proclaim him king, because the Sibylla had predicted that only a king could defeat the Parths, the people who had defeated Crassus back in 53. And the popular assembly would of course approve. The Senate also would approve, because its recent reform had given the Caesarians a majority. So all that remained was the dagger, before it was too late. On the morning of the Ides, the 15th of March, Caesar's wife Calpurnia told him that she had dreamed of him covered in blood and begged him not to go to the Senate. But a friend who belonged to the conspiracy came instead to urge him, and Caesar followed him. On the street, a fortune teller shouted out at him, "Caesar, beware of the Ides of March." "It's already the Ides," Caesar replied. "But they are not over yet," the other replied. When Caesar entered the Senate courtroom, someone put a rolled papyrus in his hand. It was a detailed complaint, but Caesar did not have the time to read it. After all, the conspirators were all over him with their daggers. The only one who could defend him, Mark Antony, had been stopped in the anteroom by Trebonius, a conspirator. Brutus himself had given instructions to keep Antony away from the scene of the murder, to spare his life. And Caesar first tried to repair himself with his arm, but stopped when he saw Brutus among the assassins. Suetonius, the great historian, reports that his last words were, "Quoque tu, Brute, fili mi, Brutus, my son, you too." And it's probably true. He fell pierced with blows at the foot of the statue of Pompey. But where was exactly killed Caesar? This is probably the area. This is it's not in the Fora, but it's a square, which is in Rome. It's called Piazza Argentina, and here is what has been recognized as the Pompeius Curia, and that was a building where the Senate gathered at the time, and here they say that's the right place where Caesar was killed, because a cement slab of 3 meters in width and 2 meters in height has been dug back, uncovered, and this was the slab that Augustus, the Emperor Augustus, put on the very place where Caesar was killed. So when you go to Rome, look for Largo Argentina, and you'll stand in the very place where Caesar was killed. Now, I have another picture for you, and this is the picture of from the Divine Comedy. The two figures here, figurines here, are Dante and his guide Virgilius, and this is Satan in person. And in the last circle of hell, Lucifer is dining with the fleshes of the traitors, the major traitors in the history of mankind, and for Dante, of course. And it's 3 of them. It's Judas, of course, and then Brutus and Cassius. Back to Caesar, back to the crime scene. Mark Antony entered the room. He saw the corpses lying on the ground, and everyone expected him to have an outburst of wrath. But instead, the faithful lieutenant fell silent and silently went out. Outside, a crowd grew. The news had already begun to circulate. And fearfully, the conspirators showed themselves on the door, and some of them tried to explain what had happened, justifying it as a triumph of freedom. But the crowd was more and more menacing. And the conspirators retreated. They barricaded themselves in the capital with armed servants as guards and sent a message to Mark Antony to come and get them away. Antony came the next day and managed to calm the crowd with a skillful speech in which he asked for the order to be maintained, and in return he promised that the guilty would be punished. Then he went to Calpurnia, who was annihilated by grief, and had her give him Caesar's will, sealed in an envelope. He handed it over to the Vestals, the priestess of the goddess Vesta, as was the use of Rome, and he didn't open it, so much so that he was sure he would be designated as Caesar's heir. Then he secretly sent to call the troops camped out of town, returned to the Senate, and delivered the speech approving the senators' approval for general amnesty as long as the Senate ratified all projects that Caesar had left incomplete. He also proposed to Cassius and Brutus a governorate, a leadership, a mandate in Asia Minor. This would allow them to leave Rome, and on that evening he dined with them. On the 18th, 3 days later, he was charged with the funeral praise. And this was the gravest mistake made by Brutus. Before, he had let Antony alive. Now he allowed Caesar's funeral honors to take place the way Antony desired. He had lost control of the situation, if he had any. The next day, Antony had the Vestals deliver Caesar's will. He opened it solemnly before the high officials of the state and gave a public reading of it. Of his private enormous fortune of about 100 million sesterzi, Caesar left a small sum to every Roman citizen and donated his wonderful gardens to the city as a public park. The citizens were taken by an extraordinary, heartfelt regret for their benefactor. Then, when the body was brought into the forum, Antony gave the eulogy, and seeing that the crowd was moved by his words, he passed to a pathetic tone. He grabbed Caesar's robes, soaked with his blood. He showed them high, showed the gashes produced by the daggers, all the wounds that Caesar had received. And finally, the ceremony degenerated into open disorder. Caesar had reserved a bitter surprise for Antony. The rest of the estate was to be divided among his 3 great-grandchildren. One of the 3, Caius Octavius, was adopted as a son and designated heir. The faithful lieutenant, who had invited the murderers to dinner 48 hours after the murder of his boss, was thus rewarded for his strange fidelity. The conspirators were not capable of devising a coherent political action which could give them the support of the urban populace and Caesar's veterans. Within a few days, they resolved to abandon Rome. And in the following weeks, Antony proclaimed to follow Caesar's notes and imposed the approval of numerous laws and ordinances favoring soldiers, friends, allies, subjects of the provinces. In Rome, no one knew this Caius Octavius here. His grandmother had been Julia, Caesar's sister. His father had made a decent career and ended up governor of Macedonia. The boy had grown up under an almost Spartan discipline and had studied profitably. Uncle Caesar, who had no legitimate children despite all the wives he had taken him into his house and become fond of him. He had taken Caius with him in Spain in 45 when he went to eradicate the last Pompeians, and on that occasion he had admired the willpower of that young man, fragile in facing labors disproportionate to his health, but with such courage in facing the enemy. Caesar followed his studies, and when Caius was 17 years old, he entrusted him with a small command in Illyria to practice leadership and government. He was still in Illyria when a messenger reached him at the end of March with the news of his uncle's death and his will. He ran to Rome and went to see Mark Antony. The general treated him with contempt, calling him little boy. Caius did not take it as an offense, and in return he calmly asked if the money Caesar had left to the peasants and soldiers had actually been distributed. Antony replied that there was something more urgent to think about. But Caius borrowed the funds from the rich friends of Caesar and distributed them as he had ordered. Thus, he gained the favor of Caesar's plebeian followers and veterans, who began to look sympathetically at the little boy. Even though he was very young, he knew how to behave. Moreover, Caius had now taken, thanks to the adoption, the name of Caius Iulius Caesar Octavian, a clear reference to his uncle. Antony was irritated and a few days later claimed that he had been the victim of an attack and that he had heard from the hitman that Octavian had organized the attack. Octavian, in return, asked for evidence, and since Antony could not present it, he reached the 2 legions he had recalled from Illyria, joined them with those of the 2 consuls in charge, and marched with them against Antony. He was only 18 at the time, which is why the Senate was on his side. The aristocrats were alarmed by Antony's bullying. He had plundered the treasure, he had arbitrarily occupied Pompey's palace, and he had appointed himself governor of Cisalpine Gaul, so that he could hold an army in Italy. So the Senate realized that by letting him act freely, soon they would end up with another Caesar, and worse than the original one. And for this, they decided to favor Caius Octavius, a little boy they thought they could maneuver more easily. Feeling that he was losing support in Rome, Antony fled to Gallia Narbonense, north of the Alps. In here he obtained the support and the legions of Governor Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, also a Caesarian. Both Antony and Lepidus were now declared public enemies by the Senate. The clash between the 2 armies took place near Modena. Octavian's army prevailed, and moreover, he happened to be the only surviving commander. The 2 consuls had fallen dead, and Antony, who had been beaten for the first time in his life, he had fled. Thus, as the little boy returned to Rome at the head of all the troops stationed in Italy, he went to the Senate, imposed his appointment as consul, the annulment of the amnesty for the conspirators of the Ides of March and the death sentence. Now, even Octavius was getting unpopular with the senators, who now they realized that he had no intention to be their instrument. Octavius got in touch with Antony and Lepidus, and then he summoned them to Bologna and established with them what has been called the Second Triumvirate, thus showing that he had learned his uncle's lesson very well. The Senate bowed. The three leaders had the popular assembly pass a law by which triumvirs were appointed for the reform of the state with duration of 5 years, renewed for another 5. They had the right to make laws, appoint magistrates, judge without appeal against their sentences, decide peace and war, assign the land. Caesar had died, but absolute power had not. Only it had passed on to the 2 lieutenants and the dictator's adopted son. Guards were stationed at all gates of the city, and the great vengeance began. 300 senators and 2,000 officials were charged with the murder, tried and killed, and their assets seized. A bounty was also placed on the heads of those who fled, but most preferred to kill themselves, and in the gesture they had the style of the great ancient Romans. The tribune Salvo, for example, he gave a banquet, drank the poison, and his last will was for the lunch to continue. The most greedy prey for Antony was Cicero, the great former consul and senator who had opposed him. He had tried to escape, but Antony's patrols swooped on him at the port of Formia. Cicero meekly offered his neck. His decapitated head was carried to triumvirs together with his right hand. Now the two main culprits, Brutus and Cassius, who, as governors of Macedonia and Syria respectively, they had joined forces and formed the last army of the Republican Rome, they remain to be published. The battle took place at Philippi on September 42. Brutus broke Octavian's line, but Antony broke into Cassius' side, who was killed by an attendant. After a chase, Brutus also suicided. Antony searched for his corpse, and when he found it, he pitifully covered it with his purple tunic. He remembered that Brutus had asked the conspirators to spare him. At this point, the triumvirs divided the territories of the Republic. Octavian had Europe, Lepidus, Africa, and Antony chose Egypt, Greece, and the Middle East. Each of them knew that the accommodation was temporary. Each of them hoped to take the other two out sooner or later. The most confident was Antony, who believed in military force and knew that he was, as a general, superior to the others. Caesar had been eliminated by Caesar's armies, but Caesar's armies remained, and it was the leaders of these armies who competed for absolute power. In the years that followed, the power game would be played only between Caesar's adopted son and Caesar's right-hand man, between Octavian and Antony, now allies against the Senate, soon again rivals, and finally open enemies. One thing was certain: the times of the Roman Republic were over. So, this is the end of episode 4, and I hope you have been curious enough to stay with me for all this time, more than 1 hour. And this is an anticipation of episode 5, Octavian will become Augustus, and it will be the birth of the Roman Empire. So we'll talk again in 2 weeks. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao. Have a nice weekend. Bye. Bye-bye.